Good evening, everyone. My name is Julia Duke, and I'm the Vice Chair of DV Leap's Advocacy Council. The Advocacy Council is a group of young professionals who support DV Leap's mission to advocate for survivors of domestic violence by planning educational and fundraising events. We are hosting tonight's event, the Women Working in DV Spaces Career Panel. And last fall, we supported DV Leap by hosting a virtual 5K where we helped raise $20,000. If you would be interested in joining or you have any questions, Flora Patel, DV Leap's development coordinator, has put a form in the chat and a member of the Advocacy Council will reach out. Now I am pleased to introduce the wonderful Sasha Drobnik, DV Leap's legal director and interim executive director, who will be moderating the panel and introducing our impressive panelists. Sasha.
Thanks, Julia, and hi everybody, and big thanks to the to DV Leap's Advocacy Council for imagining this great event. I'm really excited and looking forward to talking with our panelists, who are awesome women who have agreed to share their experiences working with survivors with us tonight. For those of you who aren't familiar with DV Leap, we are the only national nonprofit organization that provides pro bono or free representation to domestic violence survivors who need to appeal unjust trial outcomes or need to defend against an abuser's appeal of a good trial outcome. We do this in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. We also file amicus briefs, which are friend of the court briefs, to support survivors in their appeals. We have filed 12 amicus briefs in the Supreme Court. We train attorneys on a range of topics to help them better and more effectively represent survivors, and we lead policy reform to improve the law. So please feel free to visit our website to learn more. But now we'll turn over to the real heart of the evening, which is to hear from our panelists. As I mentioned, we are super lucky to be spending the next hour with our four accomplished and inspiring panelists who have all taken very different career paths, but share a fierce commitment to domestic violence survivors. Because we are have a limited time together, we will take as many questions via the chat that we have time to at the end of the event. We did incorporate several of the questions contributed through the registration process already from our audience. But if we don't get to your question, then please accept our apologies. So speaking of time limits, could not do justice to the experiences and accomplishments of our panelists. And so instead, I'm going to just direct you to the chat where their bios are available to you. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce herself and just say a few words about her work with domestic violence survivors. And so, Trina, can we start with you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Trina Fairley Barlow, and I am an attorney and a partner with the law firm of Cole & Mooring in Washington, D.C. And I am also a board member of DV Leap, and my work with domestic violence survivors has included exactly what Sasha just said, which is representing survivors in appellate proceedings to help change and shape the law so that when courts are deciding custody issues where there's been experiences of domestic abuse in the home, really working to make sure that the court takes that into account when it's deciding custody issues in order to help keep survivors and their children safe.
Thanks, Trina. And Trina's led several successful custody appeals for us, and custody appeals are really hard to win. So, and I think you were one of a Team of the Year awardees as well. So thanks for being with us. Cindy, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, certainly. I'm Cindy Dyer, and I am a little long in the tooth. So I started my career as a specialized domestic violence prosecutor in Dallas, Texas. I was a specialized prosecutor for almost 15 years. And then I was appointed and served as the director of the Office on Violence Against Women. And that was a position that I was appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, which was super nerve-wracking. And then I was the vice president of human rights at an international women's organization called Vital Voices. And I oversaw all of their gender-based violence programming for 12 years. And then I left, and I'm currently at the Department of Defense, overseeing implementation efforts of changes that the Department of Defense is making to issues regarding sexual assault, domestic violence, and sexual harassment. And it's such a pleasure to be on the panel with such tall trees. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Cindy. Wow. Lots of exciting background there. Alana, I am going to ask you to go next.
Good evening. My name is Lana Brown. I am the executive director of the Safe Sister Circle. So we provide legal services to Black women survivors of domestic violence and sexual abuse. We focus primarily on wards 7 and 8. And like DV Leap focuses more at the appellate level, we focus more on the ground level, working with Superior Court. So we represent survivors in getting civil protection orders and domestic violence court and DC Superior Court. We represent survivors in family law cases, custody, child support, every once in a while divorce court. And we do criminal advocacy. So we can't represent them in criminal courts, that's what the prosecutors do. But we represent them, their interests, and like helping them understand the court system, helping them do victim impact statements and things like that. We also provide holistic services. We refer them to therapy groups, housing services and things like that. We provide them with housing sometimes ourselves. If we run out of money, we have different grants that we can provide them with, like hotel stays, or expertise. We get experts for our cases. We try to give them, more than just legal services. We want them to thrive, not just survive. That's like our goal. And we do have culturally specific services. So most of our attorneys are Black women. Actually, all of our attorneys are Black women. All of our board are Black women. That's not intentional. That's more self-selected. And we feel like we also are all trauma informed through DVAC program, but also we just had a trauma informed 3-day program last month where we had someone come in and teach our attorneys about more ways to find triggers for trauma informed clients and how to keep themselves safe safe from vicarious trauma, or somewhat safe through vicarious trauma, the best you can be. So I think it's over my time. So yes, I'm Alana.
Thanks, Alana. Work you're doing is so super important. All right, last but absolutely not least, Jennifer, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Suzie, and really pleased to be here on this panel and with all of you virtually. I'm a partner at Jones Day Law Firm. I'm in the Washington office, and I sit in our appellate practice. I mostly do patent law for my paying client work, but I've really found it very rewarding to do DV cases, which I started doing with DV Leap. So I'm somewhat similar to Trina in that respect, that I've done as pro bono counsel, represented survivors of domestic violence or submitted amicus briefs on behalf of DV Leap or another organization on these issues. And I am also on the board of directors of DV Leap.
Yes, thanks, Jennifer. Yes,
sure.
Many wonderful cases with Jennifer and her different teams. So DV Leap's very lucky. So what a rich range of experience we have represented with you all here tonight. Just to give a sense of how the evening's going to flow, we're going to start with just a few questions that are more general, not DV specific, but more general career questions. And then we'll move into more of those questions about our panelists' direct experience working with survivors. So first question up is to, and let's see, Alana, I'm going to ask you this question. Could you talk about something that you know now at this stage in your career journey, based on your experiences, that you really wish you knew when you were starting out?
I guess you can't plan out your career. I think that when I started, first of all, when I started law school, I thought I was doing international human rights for women and children in Africa or the Caribbean. And that did not happen. I was African studies major in undergrad. And then I thought, I became a prosecutor like Cindy. I was a prosecutor in Manhattan and in New York for several years. And I thought I was going to be there for a period of time. And then I originally thought I would end up doing kind of what I'm doing now, but wasn't sure. So I just didn't have a strategic kind of like plan of what I was going to do next. I just kind of landed here. So just kind of coming into the legal world thinking, well, this is what I'm going to do for the next 15, 20 years. This is the type of lawyer I'm going to be. It doesn't work that way. No one kind of starts where they end up as a lawyer. But most people I know, most people go to firms, they go in-house counsel, go to firms, go to nonprofits, go to like different advocacy groups. So I think I just wish I knew that don't be so stringent with yourself. Don't be so closed-minded with yourself. Let yourself be open-minded and be more aware of different opportunities that come around you, because you're not going to stick in those opportunities necessarily, but just know that there's like, keep yourself open to different things. Every experience I've had have been great opportunities and experiences, but it's all led me to where I am today.
Thanks, Alana. That's so true, right? And has shaped who you are. Yeah, I think that's true also more for women than men in terms of like our circuitous roots through our careers, and including taking time to take care of family or what have you. So, but yeah, all builds on who you are. So thanks for that. Just before I go to the next question, do either of the other three panelists, did you have a pearl that you wanted to say on that subject? All right, so the next question is, Cindy, what was the best career advice that you ever received?
Okay, I was so hoping that you would ask me this question. I never got any good career advice. I think that I didn't take the career advice that I got. The career advice that I got, I'm old school from Texas, and you were supposed to go to law school and get a good job that paid good money, and then sit at the pool and drink margaritas on the weekends. I think that was the career advice I got. And what I didn't get, but which I did in myself just do, was do what makes you happy. If you have a law degree, you're already, honestly, even if you have a job that pays at the low end of the law firm, law attorney scale, you're still making more than the majority of Americans. And so you can do what you want to do, and you can still have a new car. You can probably have a Honda, not like a BMW, but you can have a new car. Do what makes you happy. I feel like when I was a DA, when I was a prosecutor, I was in the regular jurisdiction, and I really wanted to go and do specialized domestic violence work. And I remember my colleagues, the advice that they gave me was, Cindy, you're throwing your career away. Or when I said, I'm going to leave the felony courts and I'm going to go do, misdemeanor and other domestic violence. They said, you're throwing your career away. Or they said to me, Cindy, you used to be such a good attorney, like I had died or something. And I did what I wanted to do. I did domestic and sexual violence work because that is what made me want to get up in the morning. And I had no idea in 1993, before the Violence Against Women's Act passed, that it was going to end up being like a big deal. Like, I actually did not know that it was going to be kind of a thing that people really cared about. I did it because I thought, you know what, these women need my help. And I remember I had one of my friends in Dallas, they said, well, Cindy, you went to law school, you want to go and you want to be a prosecutor. You want to be a great prosecutor who prosecutes murder cases. And I remember saying, you know what? No, a good prosecutor prosecutes murder cases, because murder cases, the police are out there, they're getting every scrap of evidence and they're bringing it all to you. So you're a good prosecutor if you can prosecute a murder case, but you're a great prosecutor if you can prevent a murder case. And that is done by aggressively helping women get protective orders. That is done by aggressively prosecuting low-level misdemeanor domestic violence cases. And I just went for that. And I did what made me happy. And it's turned out okay. My kids are in college. I have a brand new Honda Fit in my driveway. I don't have a garage, but I have a driveway and I have a Honda Fit. So that's the good, career advice that I did not receive, but that I gave to myself and I'm now giving to y'all. So thanks for asking.
That is invaluable advice. It may be scary to take it first, but it's good to hear that it worked out. Trina or Jennifer, do you have career advice that you received that you want to share?
Sure. It's somewhat similar to Cindy, but in a different context, which is to be authentic. I remember when I was a mid-level associate and trying to transition to managing associates, and I was sort of like, how do you do this? I remember talking to my practice leader. I was really fixated on how do I become a manager, and he said, well, look around, like you've been working here for several years, draw on what you find valuable from the more senior attorneys you've worked with, but it really needs to be true to yourself. And so while I learned so much from more senior lawyers, I really had to figure out what is my style and be comfortable being myself. So a great mentor I had he just has a different personality than I do. And I also remember my practice leader telling me, you don't need to be him. I have no idea why he said this, but he said, you don't need to be Hillary Clinton. Maybe he was trying to pick a woman or something. I don't know. I admire her, but I have no idea why he picked that analogy. But he just said, you just need to be you. And I think that especially, I see it in big firms where there still is some disparity between, for instance, men and women, and being comfortable, there isn't a cookie cutter way to do it. And you just need to be comfortable and pursue what makes sense for you, your writing voice, your presentation style, who you are. I think that advice to be authentic really rung true, and I would definitely share that with anyone, particularly those of you who are, I see some of you, in school and just starting out your careers.
Yeah. So it's really funny because Cindy and Jennifer literally took both of each of them. And so, but this is where hopefully our training and having to think on our feet sometimes will pay some dividends. I just have to say, Jennifer, I agree wholeheartedly. The one thing I will add, in the types of law firms that we work in, people may experience at other places, sometimes you're the only woman in the room. And certainly I've been the only woman of color in the room a lot of times. And so it took me a while in my career to find my own voice and my own authenticity, because you're at first thinking I need to fit in and I don't want to draw attention. But what I've learned over the course of practicing now more than 2 decades is that authenticity is what makes a difference, right? That what you being Jennifer, me being me, is the thing that actually might help a client, whether it be one of our DV clients or our clients in the corporate world. That authenticity may be the difference maker in providing the legal advice that's needed to win the case or make the difference. So I applaud that and echo that. The only other thing I would say just briefly, which has been more relevant to me in more recent years, the advice I got is grow where you're planted. Sometimes you get mid-career, you get frustrated, you're like, I should be this and I should be doing that. And you start to get antsy and wonder, well, should I go try something else? And some good advice that I got when I was a younger partner is, wait a minute, it's okay, grow where you're planted, learn the lessons where you are. So when it's your time to be elevated to a different position within your firm or whatever, or within your company, you learn the lessons where you're planted, because they will help you when you move on to other things.
Thanks, Trina. That's and Cindy and Jennifer. So it's so interesting, with the exception of that last bit from Trina, none of that advice was given, right? It was all kind of came from within, and I imagine help from mentoring and helping from support, peer support is important to get there and get to the point where you can really listen to yourself and believe in being authentic and believe in doing what makes you happy. So, but yeah, so thanks very much. At this point, I think we should start looking at your DV experiences more specifically. And maybe Alana, could you start off just talking a little bit about why working with and for survivors is so important to you?
That's a complicated question, but I would say growing up in this area, I'm originally from DC, Southeast. I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland. There was high rates of domestic violence and sexual abuse that was very much taboo in the sense that you swept it under the table, but it was very much normalized in the community, like particularly in the Black community. It was like people hit their wives, people hit their children, people hurt people. It was a lot of violence within the community, and it was seen as acceptable. And I just knew that when I went to law school, I always wanted to be a lawyer since I was like 8. I always knew that I wanted to be a law, so I wanted to change things. There's a lot of violence against women, a lot of degrading of Black women, a lot of talking about Black women's bodies, a lot of violence toward Black women's bodies. And I always knew I wanted to change that when I became a lawyer, whether it was internationally or whether it was in my own backyard. And so it wasn't international, and it was going to either be in New York or DC. I just decided to come home back to DC. I wanted to like help Black women survivors who also deal with like their own racial trauma and deal with the trauma of being a Black woman, but also deal with the trauma of being a survivor and dealing with also survivor living in this particular city. Like not only a survivor who's a Black woman dealing with trauma, but a Black survivor living in DC. And what does it mean to live in DC? And what does it mean to live in Ward 78 specifically, to be geographically and culturally different than the rest of the DC? And so that's kind of why I wanted to help a specific type of woman, not to generalize groups of people together, because I'm not generalizing like everyone's the same person, but I wanted to like focus on a separate group of women who I felt like needed the most help, in which I could focus on them and provide that help that was needed. But I saw a gap in services, and I thought, well, maybe I could provide help in those services. But I think probably everyone would say the same reason why they started providing domestic services is important in our nation. It's the highest rate death of women in the country. For Black women, has the highest rate of domestic violence and sexual assault in the country. So there's just lots of reasons why people want to get involved in this type of work.
Thanks, Alana. And thank you for modeling authenticity. I don't think you could describe that any better. Cindy, can you talk a little bit about why working with survivors was important to you in your career?
When I grew up, I was the only child of a single mom, and my mother and my father had a super terribly vicious divorce. And I had always experienced that my mother was not treated very well in the justice system. And so I always thought, well, I am going to fix that. And so I was always interested in pursuing enhanced justice for women, particularly. And so when I went to the DA's office, I was originally thinking, well, maybe I'll do sexual violence crimes, but there was a need for domestic violence, because the domestic violence crimes were mostly misdemeanors, not felonies, and so they were not, as people didn't want to do them as much. They were oftentimes with women who were really struggling with whether they even wanted to work with the criminal justice system. They were not with women that just were like, help me, help me, help me. And there were so many prosecutors that were lined up to work on other types of cases. And these were the cases that nobody was lined up to work for these particular victims. And I sort of saw myself as an outsider, and I thought, well, these are my people. These are the people that I'm going to work with. And I always tried to do it in a way that made the system seem a little more accessible, because I think it was very frightening for a lot of my victims, especially, I mean, I was a prosecutor back before the Violence Against Women's Act passed, y'all. I mean, this was kind of the Wild West, and there were awful, horrible practices that were just regularly occurring against victims of domestic violence. And I thought that they were treated so poorly. And everybody, especially like in Dallas, everybody wanted to help victims of violence that were kids, because kids were cute and kids were little and kids had kid problems. But the moment that that young girl became 16 or 17, and she had big people problems, and she had a tattoo, and she had other issues, and they didn't like her as much, and she wasn't cute and fluffy like a little puppy, and they didn't care as much, and it just made me so angry. And because I'm like, yeah, she is the 17-year-old that you didn't intervene when she was 4 and 5 and 6. And so I just started focusing on them because I thought that they needed somebody to be an advocate for them. And I felt like a little bit of an outsider. I wasn't from Dallas. My daddy wasn't a judge or a defense attorney. And so I just thought, these are my people. And so, it's so funny. I felt like I was half throwing my career away when I did it. And I never in a million years thought that it would end up being Luke. Here I am. I'm in DC, y'all. I'm like a poor kid from Waco, Texas. But I loved it. And I felt like those people needed an advocate. And so I wanted to be that advocate for them. And it was there were tough times in the mid-90s. I had judges, they called me zealot. They threatened to throw me in the holdover cell. But I just felt like these women needed an advocate, and I had some big ovaries, and I was going to be that advocate. So I appreciate thanks for giving me an opportunity to traipse down memory lane.
No, thanks for sharing that. I love the big ovaries illusion, but as much as things have changed, and I'm sure you've seen the arc of change, there certainly is still it's still a real problem. And so I hope we're inspiring lots of people on this Zoom call tonight to follow in all 4 of your footsteps. So Trina, I'm going to ask you a different question. I'm going to ask what, based on your experience working with survivors, what do you see as the deepest barriers to justice?
Mm-hmm. I think the deepest barrier is access, right? A lot of times women don't know where to go, who to call, what to do. They know they're in a tough situation and they're wondering if anybody will listen and if anyone will help. So I think access and information is really an important barrier to overcome when it comes to helping survivors. That is the key one. And then courage, right? Because the first step for a survivor it's related to the access, is to step forward and seek out the help. That's on the survivor side. I think on the attorney side, or the side of people who are helping survivors, is forums like this. I love the chat because so many people are saying, I want to help, I want in, what do I do? And so I think getting information and training to people who have the passion like Cindy does is really, really important, because that passion is half the battle, right? I mean, a lot of us can write legal briefs, but it's that passion. And you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to put it in a little bit. But my experience and passion and desire to work with survivors starts from my childhood. Growing up, I had a pretty small nuclear family. My mom, my dad, and a sister. And my parents became foster parents, and we had 2 children that grew up with us for many years, and both came into the system because of domestic violence. Social services was pulling them out of the home because of domestic violence. And so how sad was that, right? That this was going on. I mean, I love that we got to have them in our home, but what I recalled? Those kids wanted to be in their own homes. That's what I recalled. And so then when I grew up and then became a lawyer, then because of that experience with child custody, I did a lot of guardian ad litem cases in DC Superior Court, where I'm licensed to practice. And a lot of the cases that I was a guardian ad litem for involved, once again, either violence with respect to the mother usually, or sadly, to Cindy's point, a child. and the custody issues were resolving around this. So mine has sort of been a progression and a continuum. And so when I was first approached to help work on an amicus brief for basically what I would call a custody hearing gone bad, right? Because the court did not look at the factors that it needed to look at to determine whether or not the child should be placed back with the dad in this case, or what type of visitation should happen. I thought to myself, it was sort of full circle for me. Well, I can help because you see what that looks like when those factors aren't considered and how it can impact a family and a child.
Oh, super interesting. Thank you for answering the question I didn't ask you. It was wonderful. And I just curious, do you have a sense of the foster kids that came into your home? Do you have a sense of whether they were removed because there was an inaccurate assessment of who was perpetuating domestic violence, or who was?
I don't have a sense, but I can recall one case in particular. One of the moms of the children really did believe that, because we would take them to still see their parents, right? I mean, that was part of the deal. But I mean, I was a child, right? So I don't really remember all of the ins and outs. But what I do remember is all of the parents thinking that it was the wrong decision was made. And what I remember more than anything was the impact to those families, right? The really sad mom who can't be with her daughter, or the really sad child who can't be with her mother, right? Because the home was deemed unsafe.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that, Trina. Jennifer, what or has any of your work with survivors that you've done changed your thinking or your perspective or your outlook in significant ways?
Sure. Yeah, let me offer a few different ideas on that. So first, I would be remiss in just not acknowledging that when working directly with a survivor of domestic violence, it's hard not to be affected and changed by their personal story, what they've gone through, often why the justice system hasn't treated them well, a lot of the misperceptions and implicit biases that exist in this area of law. And it's, and you're dealing with a real live person where such fundamental issues of safety, physical and mental health, are all just intertwined. And so it is hard to come away from these cases, not being affected. But on a broader scale, it has, certainly opened my eyes to the way there are these prejudgments, biases all throughout the system, sometimes known, but a lot of times I think just not known. And the way decision makers, judges, attorneys in power on the other side are really carrying that out, and how unfair and unjust it is. And so to DV Leap's credit, like the work that it does, training judges, training lawyers to turn around some of those misperceptions, because I think I sort of knew that intellectually, but it is a different thing to see it play out and in someone's life, that a decision is made because there is this misperception about the woman or the mom in the courtroom, or filing papers, one of the parties in the case, and it just spirals out and ends up being this decision that, as Trina said, like, how did we get here? Like, how did this happen? Because it's kind of baked into the system. And so that has been eye-opening.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I think it's one of the biggest, it's one of the biggest challenges as an attorney working at trial or appellate level is trying to address the bias and trying to address the myths and the stereotypes. And it seems like you can file a million amicus briefs kind of laying it out, but it really it's requires a fundamental shift in thinking. That's it's a slow go. Cindy, I see you nodding your head. Jump on in. Did you have something to add on that?
No, I was just so deeply agreeing with what you were saying, and just that it is a slow go, and it is so hard to get people to understand and be a little more sympathetic, and to take into account that the experiences that so many of the victims have had, they didn't just wake up like this, it was a lifetime of experiences that created this person that has made those decisions. And I just felt so in agreement with what you were saying. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Jennifer said, because we obviously have not worked on the same cases, but what she was describing sounded like the cases too, where some of the decisions were turning on how the one of the parties, the survivor, behaved in court, or what they didn't say or what they did do. And I agree with that. It is frustrating, because that bias can impact outcomes and can impact the analysis that happens that leads to some of the decisions that I spoke about earlier. So thanks for just putting that into words, because it's what I think a lot of times when I'm working on the cases, but I think you articulated it so well.
Thanks, Trina. Alana, do you want to jump in on any of that? I know from your casework, you've been had all sorts of experiences with.
You know how I feel about Dyer.
I do.
It's my biggest thing, but it doesn't surprise me. I guess that's the difference. I know that we live in a systematic world of systematic oppression. I knew that growing up. I know that now, and so I think when I was a prosecutor, I already was aware of it, but it became very clear to me, like, who your survivor was, who your victim was, what type of case it was. Like, did people care about Dominicans and Uptown getting beat by their men? No. Did people care about a DUI person and Midtown was rich doing DUI? Yes. And so it was just like who you were was who people cared about. And so, and then how they care about you and how they perceive you in court. Like, how a woman of color, like a Latina, may come to court with a bunch of kids. They may be traumatized, may be affected by, may have a form of trauma to their brain. They may come out sounding really loud, or come out getting smart with the judge, having attitude with the judge. And it's not because they are smart or attitudinal people, that's not the word, but smart people. But it's just that because they've been traumatized is how they come across, and trying to get judges to understand that people have been traumatized and that people have been going through these different things in their lives, and they show up this way, that as their best selves, but as like the sum of their lives, to treat them fairly is hard. And to say, like, to look at someone as like, well, they come from a certain background compared to a middle class person coming from another background, I expect that's a good mother. That's a bad mother. She does herself get beat in front of children. And that's a good mother. She that guy must have attacked her. She's just, it's very hard to like see Black women as victims in this country. And it's very easy to see white women as victims in this country. And how does that play out in the court system in terms of who is allowed to be claimed victimhood? And like when your survivorship is on the table. So yes, I see. And we had to prep our clients for that, actually, for that biases. We try to like prep them and say, look, you're going to go into court. They're going to see you a certain way. We're going to try to argue this. We're going to try to argue that. We want you to present it this way. Or we prepare them as like, look, we don't think you're going to come across very good in court. To be honest, like, we think you're going to be a terrible witness, and we think about what to settle this case because we think based on your trauma, like this is going to go terribly wrong. This CPO hearing to go terribly, terribly wrong, and so what are we going to do about that? So that's something we take into consideration while when we have cases and we're dealing with cases and clients.
And that you don't learn in law school, right? Like that's not your typical lawyering course that you get. Yeah, and that's hard to do, right? That's hard to say to a client that, look, you're not gonna come across well. Like you need to have some trust with your client and a relationship for that to work. Yeah, no, thank you. So we're getting all sorts of great questions coming in. So I want to, there's one question that I definitely wanted all of you to weigh in on. And then I wanted to make sure we got to some of these questions that are coming in from the chat. So, so the last kind of global question is just what advice can you give to people who are early on in their career who really want to work with survivors, but want to avoid burnout? And anybody want to take a stab at that first, or should I pick someone? Okay, Cindy, the big smile got it.
My face gives me away every time. You know what? First of all, I don't have a magic bullet for this. I can only tell you that for me, I have a wonderful spouse and I have wonderful friends. And I was one of those people that, like, when I was starting, I was the first prosecutor to join the domestic violence division during its inception in '94. And at that time, people said, oh, well, you'll only be able to do it a couple of years. And I did it for 15. But I think it's because I had a super supportive spouse and I had really good friends, and I was able to, when I left, I was able to sometimes turn it off. Now I say that because I also, when I left, every Tuesday night for 9 years, I worked at a battered women's shelter, and I rocked the baby and stirred the soup and put clean sheets on the bed. So on Tuesday nights, I did not turn it off, but on other nights, I really did. And I feel like it was because I had that really great supportive system around me, most importantly, in the form of a really great spouse who said, this is important and we're going to do this. And I feel like that's why I'm still doing it, like literally 30 years later. Anyway, my kudos to my spouse, who doesn't even know I'm bragging on him right now.
Yeah, that family support, friend support network is pretty critical, right? Yeah. How about you, Trina? How do you avoid burnout, and how do you balance?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think my context is different, right? What's really nice about working at the law firm that I work with is we have a lot of support and resources, right, to help you. So we can put together teams, and that's how we're able to do this important work. When the cases that you referenced that my law firm worked on, I worked with one of my colleagues, and I'm going to shout her out, Christine Hawes, who is absolutely wonderful, right? And so we would sit in my office and read the transcripts that were frustrating, and then sort of talk through them and figure out how we were going to deal with them. And so you don't feel like you're alone. So it's like what Cindy said, needing someone to support you. You have your spouse, but I'm talking about a colleague who's supporting the effort and feeling this pain and is as committed as I am to trying to get the result to help this survivor, right? So I think having a strong network of people who understand and want to help is really important.
Yeah, thanks. Completely agree. Alana, how do you avoid burnout, or what advice would you give to avoid burnout?
So I can't speak on my first job as a prosecutor, because that position at that particular office, that particular time, burnout was a thing for everyone. We had like 400 cases at a time. We had like burnout was the thing. It just happened. But I would say when choosing, I think, and it was a different time also. It was like 10 years ago. So it was people weren't thinking about like trauma-informed work and like how people self-care and all that stuff as they do now. But I would say look for organizations that aligns with your values and aligns with equity, and it aligns with like health equity and aligns with self-care and care for their clients. My organization, I told my attorney, because I'm executive director and I was at the time supervising attorney. Now I got me a managing attorney, so I can let her handle that. But I told all my attorneys, like, I don't want them to burn Like I did that when I was like 24 when I started practicing. By like 27, I was like, whoo, I was worn out and cynical and tired. I was like, I don't want you to be like 27 and burnt out. I want you to be able to still be passionate about what you do, not to be cynical about people, still to want to go into courtroom, want to be around, be in the court and to like what you do and to love what you do. Don't stay up to like 3 a.m. every night. Get some sleep. Like if you gotta stay up late one night, get some sleep the next night or come in a little late the next day. Like I encourage my people to take their breaks. We have very generous leave. Like, please take that leave. Please go on vacation. You know, we'll survive without you. Like, I try to like encourage that mindset. Like I said, we also have people come in for trauma training to learn about trauma, but for trauma for themselves. Because I believe that that's like healthy. So people, healthy survivors should be healthy themselves. Because how can you help people get healthy if you're not healthy within yourself? So I look for organizations that believe that there's a lot of organizations out there that do that. Particularly in this field, but I think we're sensitive to that because we work in a field people suffer a lot. So we're sensitive to like making sure people who work with suffering people don't suffer as much. So I would just say look for the values and speak to people when you're, you know, they're interviewing you and like look up like information about the organization.
Nice, yeah. I think there's much more awareness around self-care and vicarious trauma, I think now than there has been in the past, fortunately. And, you know, obviously Safe Sister Circle is really walking the walk in terms of treating your employees with the same kind of care and sensitivity that you do your clients.
That's why people to leave because we're new. So we don't want people to leave us. So we're like,
and then there's that too. Thanks, Alana. What about you, Jennifer? What are your thoughts on avoiding burnout and balancing?
Sorry, I'm probably not adding anything new, and I think it picks up from what Alana was saying, but the way I think about it, and really, first of all, hats off to Cindy and Alana who are immersed in this work, you know, 100% of the time. It's my pro bono practice, but it's, you know, it's different representing corporations that don't have some of these immensely personal issues that you deal with in DV cases. But the way I think about it is, I think it's important for folks who are dealing with, whether it's a very stressful situation or a very serious and outrageous situation, as often DV cases are, to at the same time allow joy into your life. It can be complex to both be outraged and upset and you know, really immersed in some of these issues, but also think about being joyful. And I'm not talking about materialistic joy, but just, you know, we are in a beautiful season in DC, like allow yourself to feel those feelings as well and not feel guilty that you're having some joy in your life at the same time that you're you know, doing really serious work. And it maybe sounds contradictory, but I do think that's an important way to avoid burnout and keep yourself able to do this kind of work on a long-term basis.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's really important to give yourself permission to see beauty and celebrate beauty, and so thanks for that. Thank you all for sharing. So we've got some great questions from the audience. One is very, very specific to going to law school, and the question is, does it matter if you go to a T14 law school? Who wants to take that one?
So I can start, and by T14 we mean tier 14. I don't know the lingo, but I assume it goes back, I think, to what Cindy said at the outset. If you are really passionate about becoming a lawyer, you should go to the law school that you get into and that you're interested in going into, because I always believe, this is something that I heard growing up, cream rises to the top, right? So if it doesn't matter where you go to law school, if you are are really serious about going. Just like if you go to a top law school and you don't want to be a lawyer, the result will not be good either. So if that is your passion and your life's dream and something you're serious about pursuing, I absolutely think that you should. Law school, I will tell this, I have a son who is getting older by the day, and he sometimes tells me he's going to be a lawyer, and I say that's great, but make sure you love it, right? I mean, just like anything else that you're going to pursue, it's hard work. School is expensive. So yes, go, but be very clear that that's what I want to do, and work at it with all your heart.
Thanks,
first of all, I want to say amen to her.
yeah.
Can we pass the plate now? Because amen to her. And, I would say I went to school. I mean, first of all, don't be like me. I didn't go to school where I wanted to go. I went to school where I got a scholarship. But the benefit of going where it is financially feasible for you, go where you get a scholarship, even if it's not the best school that you can get into, because that allows you to then take the job you want to take, do the job you want to do without thinking, I can't do that job that I'm passionate about because I got to pay my loans. Because you know what? That's what in a perfect world, you get a scholarship too. I'd never heard that term T14, but apparently that means good school. And so best case scenario, you get a scholarship or you've got financial wealth that you can go to a T14 and still come out with no loans. But I think that thinking about, go where you can get in, go where you will not have crushing debt so that you can do the job you want to do when you get out. And that doesn't have to be a big factor. But I'm very practical and a realist. So that's what my thought is about that.
Jennifer or Lana, do you have thoughts?
I agree with all of that. I think definitely the debt that is coming out of law school these days is huge, and so factoring that in. But finding the right fit. I definitely don't think it's an end all be all that you're in the. I think we're all aging ourselves because none of us know what T14 is, but that's the new lingo. But
I just assumed everybody knew what that was. I don't know what it is either. So.
Yeah, and we've learned something tonight, so thank you. But yeah, that is it needs to fit who you are and be the right place for you to shine. So completely agree with Trina and Cindy.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I'm gonna have to disagree, and I feel bad about this. I feel pretentious saying this because I know what T14 is.
Oh,
because it was very much a thing when I was coming up to law school, and I only applied to T14 law schools, and I went to one, and I was told, like, if you don't go to T14, don't even bother going to law school because you're not going to get a job at a good firm. You're not going to get a good job at a nonprofit. You're not going to get a good job here or there. And I wanted to work at a firm or nonprofit in New York or DC. And I was, at the time, I just wanted to be the best of the best of the best. That was my personality. And so that's what I was told. Now, I don't think you have to go to a T14, but I think if you stay in a local area, you should go to the best school in that area. For example, I had a friend who stayed in New York and got a full scholarship to Brooklyn Law School. He's a genius. He got into Harvard Law School, but he got a full scholarship to Brooklyn Law. He wanted to stay in New York. He went to Brooklyn Law for free. I had a friend who got to Fordham, same thing. I had a friend who went to NYU, same thing. Got scholarships, went to those schools instead of going to Harvard. I had another friend who got into Yale, went to Georgetown with me because he got a full scholarship to Georgetown. I'm not getting scholarship to Georgetown. I'm in debt. So, I have to deal with that. But I'm just saying that you should think about where you want to be. Like if you're in Florida, there's no real reason to go to necessarily Yale Law School if you want to stay in Florida for the rest of your life, or you want to stay in Alabama for the rest of your life. But if you want to compete in like the big markets, I think you do have to consider like where you go to school realistically, because I think it's being unrealistic. You're competing against people. There are firms that won't even interview. There are firms that won't interview me because they'll only interview the top 5 schools. That you can't even get your foot in the door. That's doubly true if you're a Black person, doubly true if you're a person of color, and you're a person of color, a woman person of color that's even, getting into the door is even that difficult. That's my experience, having gone to a T14 school and kind of been a feeder school. I went to NYU for undergrad, and so we fed into T14 schools. That was kind of like my experience. But that's not to say everything else isn't right. I'm just saying this is just a different opposing opinion.
What, so a T14, does that mean tier 14, like
top 14 ranked top 14 schools.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks. That was kind of a nice range of advice, right? So a little pragmatic, a little kind of follow your path. So we have time for just a couple more. One, it's an interesting question. So if you want to help DV victims, is it better to go into family law or criminal law? I like that question.
I think it's either or, personally. Yeah. I mean, it depends on what type, it depends on the problem, type of problem. I think being a prosecutor is a very proactive way to help people. When I did prosecution against domestic violence and sexual assault crimes, it was you could tangibly see people helping people because you saw they had a problem and you could fix it. Like someone, if the case worked out the way you wanted to, someone like hurt them, you could in a way punish them and get a punitive reaction to it. But family law is always we have to like negotiate with the other person, and it's never kind of what you want it to be. It's always settlements, or like kind of like the father still gets access to the children a lot of times, but you still need representation because it's still a case that it benefits that they have representation, but it's not generally what people want as the result. And so I think it's a different type. It's both needed, but they're just different. You're going to get different results from them.
Thanks, Lana. Anybody else have anything to add on to that?
I mean, oh, please, Jennifer. Cindy, please.
Go ahead. We're like Chip and Dale. After you, everybody else, they don't even know what that is. They know what T14, but they don't know Chip and Dale. But I was going to say, it's funny. I was a prosecutor. I feel like as a prosecutor, you can help the victims of really bad violence, and you can make sure that those victims don't get re-victimized, which is what happens with a lot of prosecutors. They think that they're doing a good job. They don't intend to do a bad job, but they frequently are super pushy with victims, and they end up almost acting like an abuser, telling them, this is what you're going to do, this is what's in your best interest, and I'm going to do it. And they don't shut up and listen. And so you can really do good work as a prosecutor. I feel like you can also do really good work as a victim, as a civil attorney, especially if you are working at a legal services organization or doing pro bono work like the amazing women on this panel, because women who can, and frankly, the problem is that civil law is so expensive for victims. And even if you have a job as a teacher or a nurse, you don't qualify for legal services in Dallas anyway, but they cannot in a million years hire a really good family law attorney. And frankly, victims are much more focused on making sure that they get custody of their kids. And so, I mean, honestly, you can do the Lord's work either place. And I think that it's just whichever one kind of fits with you. So I really think either one. And now I'm going to be quiet. Chip and Dale, after.
See, that's why I said you go, because I knew you'd say what I was going to say. I have nothing to add, but other than to highlight the chat, which says a lot of women, when they leave abusers, go to divorce court. So that's where I first encountered these types of cases. And so I think that there's work that can be done in the family space too.
I just want to add, I obviously work in the family space, and I'm not a prosecutor anymore. And to be truthful, I left the prosecutor's office because I'm very anti-carceral in my beliefs. And I did defense work before I became a prosecutor. But they offered me a job and I needed one. And it was a great experience, great litigation experience. And I thought I did good while I was there. But I think to do good, I think you have to have certain then you should live by your values. And I don't think when I was a prosecutor, I was living by my values. I do feel there's a lot of pressure you put on survivors to testify. There's a lot of pressure to put more Black men in jails, pressure to put more people into contact with police officers who don't respect them, don't treat them right. And so I think I'm really into restorative justice right now, trying to get a restorative justice program started in DC. As also a lot of survivors in DC are working towards that idea, actually. So I just think you have to, like I said about living your values and being authentic, that's what you should follow. Like if you think you can be a prosecutor in criminal law, I think that's the right path for you, go for it. If you think maybe that's not right for you, maybe you want to get to litigation, go for it, get litigation skills, get out. Or you could just do service providers and, you know, get paid less, but do something you feel free doing, something that you feel you love doing, you feel free, you don't feel guilty about at the end of the day.
Well, so Jennifer, did you have something that you wanted to?
The plug on the pro bono side, because the civil cases are where you don't have a right to counsel, and as Cindy said, that like the cost of attorneys is a huge barrier to access, and there's so much more that could be done on the pro bono side in civil cases. So even if you're not going into this full time, I just wanted to put in the plug for those of you who might be interested in pro bono work, including with DV Leap.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Pro bono is so important. But I thought, Alana, I think you brought us full circle talking about authenticity, because we started talking about that right at the beginning of the panel, and I'm mindful of the time, and we're a little bit over now. So I wanted to give anyone on our panel a chance to say anything that they feel that they need to share before we close. Is there anybody else? Did anybody want to? We good?
I'm just going to throw out there that we don't have an income requirement as of now, because only one of our grants requires that. So if you are like in the in-between space, you can still get our services. The safesistercircle.org. Just throwing that out there.
Thanks, Alana. And your the information about your Safe Sister Circle, I think, is in the chat as well. And if not, then maybe our amazing Flora, who's working the tech behind the scenes, can throw it in there. But this was a truly powerful discussion, conversation, advice sharing. Thank you all so much for spending the time with us. And I hope that it's been really inspiring for the participants. I hope we have a whole crew of people who are going to go out and fight the good fight. So thank you for being inspiring. Thank you for what you do. Thank you all for joining us. And good night, everybody.